This presentation is going through OpenBIM and IFC for landscape architecture. I'm Aage Langedrag. I'm an architect and a BIM specialist for landscape architecture at Multiconsult Norway and also for Link Architecture. Both Link Architecture and Multiconsult Norway is part of the Multiconsult group. We have landscape architects at both Multiconsult and Link Architecture. In this presentation we are going through 3 topics. First, we start with exploring projects that have been utilized BIM for landscape architecture since 2005, while analyzing success and flaws. Second, we are going through learning how national standards for BIM for landscape architecture are continuing to develop, providing more support and guidance for practitioners being required to include BIM in their project deliveries. Third, we are going to investigate design software that delivers OpenBIM for landscape architecture. When we look back, this is the starting for myself. On the left side, this is a model. All the geometry and the objects are from 2005. I'm going to explain a little bit more about that later. But the biggest benefit I saw from this model is that you could actually link all the landscape objects on the terrain here as a slab, because we are using an architect's BIM model. And all the landscape objects are following the surface of this slab. We have been using these BIM tools for landscape architecture for many years. And in 2008, in this CAD magazine here in Scandinavia, that we said that Link landscape architects are going for BIM with Revit architecture. So I've been using this in a lot of projects. This was the start before I started using these BIM tools for landscape architecture. This is a small town outside of the capital Oslo. It's at Eidsvoll. This is typical for that time how the landscape architects used to work. Very simple 2D drawings in CAD software, and that was before we even had digital cameras. Every competition we had, we could only manage to have 1 or maybe 2 what called drawings, because it took so much time. Very often we continued to develop the project and there was often a mismatch between the hand drawings when you see how we work today with 3D models. Since we won this competition, I had to develop construction drawings for all the granite elements that we're going to use in the streets. And we normally did this through the CAD drawings. We often supplemented the details with the perspective drawings. At that time, I saw a huge benefit that if I could do this just the same as the architects did, do a 3D model and get all the drawings out of one model. So even before I knew anything about BIM, before I knew anything about OpenBIM and IFC, possibility for the landscape architects to start to use this BIM software. You build one model and all the information you need in your project you get out of this one single model. Why did I start to use this? Since I'm educated as an architect, I also at the same time were going to build a family house. I was switching from 2D CAD drawings over to 3D modeling. And I went through different kind of software that we had in Norway at that time, and I ended up with Autodesk products, since almost all the landscape architects in Norway were using Autodesk products. So I modeled everything. That helped me a lot to learn how the software was actually working. And that knowledge I brought back to the office when I was working with landscape architecture. So this is my first bigger project that I start using landscape 3D modeling for landscape architecture. In the left corner down there you see a small 2D drawing for this site, and you have the photos on the lower right side. When we were going to build this, we start to communicate with the contractors on site. And it was quite complicated to explain all the details that we were seeing. And we asked them if we could get some time to rebuild everything in a 3D model, and they accepted that. And then We saw it was a huge potential, especially when landscape architecture are on top of construction. Here there are restaurants and shops underneath. This was also the first time that I saw the conflicts between the engineering's roof and the landscape architecture. Very often we see a conflict that the architects and the building engineers doesn't understand how much space landscape on top of construction actually take. So I saw even then a huge potential just to use the 3D model as communication. Then we continue. This is a small garden on top of a store. Potential that we could take all the drawings out of the model. Prefabrication of these benches with vegetation came directly out of the model. And this was also the first time I started using rendering in the BIM tool for landscape to look at the lighting. So all these light products are brought in as 3D objects directly from the light producer. Then in 2008, the American Society of Landscape Architects came up with this paper, said that also landscape architects need to come up and start working with BIM. Even if it didn't help us to say what kind of software and how we can use the software. This is a building area. Every single piece of landscape are model, and this was the first time that I also got information from the landscape engineers to put cost on items. So in my 3D model, I had cost on every object. In the model, I had also spreadsheets with cost divided into different areas, so we can quick change the objects, and then we immediately saw the benefit in the cost and count. It was also the first time that I exported IFC file. I didn't know how we could use it, but the architect used that to bring everything together and do these perspectives on top of this presentation. 2009, Daniel Tal came with this book. This was really good because I think this explains how we are going to 2D drawings over to 3D modeling for landscape architects. You have to work very precisely, you have to have your standards, you have to work systematically, and then it's so easy to go from 2D to 3D. I think this book still is one of the best books that explain how we should actually work very systematically with landscape. So even if this is a presentation of SketchUp, I think it's a good book even if you're working with other tools. In 2009, this was a school that all the communication was IFC files through the project. And we started up 2-3 days working together in the beginning, and all the IFC files was put together on place at once. Everybody learned how to communicate through OpenBIM and IFC. This was the first project that I did that landscape architecture was not on top of construction. When I look back today, I would use some other tools, so it was better to work with 3D terrain modeling. We learned a lot in this project, how to twist and tweak, because we saw so much potential that we have all the 3D geometry in the model, all the drawings went out through the model. The whole time we communicate with everybody. Every week we exported a new IFC file. Here, this university in Stavanger on the west side of Norway, in 2010 starts big that all the projects from now on are going to deliver IFC files for everybody, also for landscape architects. Some years before 2010, some colleagues of mine had done the campus here. I had all the drawings, so before we started this project, I rebuilt everything in the BIM-manual. On the left corner is a rendering in the BIM-manual. Down left side you have a photo at the site. All these granite elements are floating on top of a surface. And here we also made all the drawings for the project of the model. I started to put more and more information on the objects. You see the trash can here. I had a link to the website from the producer that show all the information on this object. You see here on the IFC file in Solibri is a model checker. You see the website link and you have directly linked to the website. I saw more and more that we need to put right information on the object. It's going to be more and more important. Then we went out to the software resellers in Norway and said, we need these kind of design tools for landscape architects. The answer back was that since the landscape architects doesn't have an IFC standard, because IFC was meant for architects and buildings, and in the beginning, Building Smart Norway said that IFC is only meant for 1 meter outside the building. So everything else for site is not meant for IFC. That changed in that period. Now we see that's a change in standardization for IFC for everything outside, but in the beginning we really struggled. And then Statsbygg gave a group of us the possibility to start to standardize IFC also for landscaping in Norway. In the beginning, we started a group to discuss what are we going to do. So we started in 2012, we started again in 2015 to 2017. You can all see it on this website. The last thing we have done there is I saw that you have to be on Norwegian language to see the landscape for IFC, and then you have this link down here. I think you should go to the right side spreadsheet. In 2018 we went through the IFC standard and looked at, is there any IFC objects that's already standardized, and we looked at other objects for landscape architects that is not standardized. Okay, what can we do now with the standards we already have? How can this be brought further on in new standards? So in this spreadsheet, we have linked to, for example, IFC furnishing. Landscape architects also work with furniture. So why shouldn't we use IFC furnishing element that is already standardized? Of course, we can do that. So in this spreadsheet, you have these links from Building Smart with information about this. Every single IFC object have already predefined types, so type enumeration. So of course, IFC furniture, you have IFC chairs, table, desk, bed, and so on. As landscape architects, we need some more objects. For example, as playground equipment, that is not already standard in IFC. In this spreadsheet, we have linked to different kind of objects that we saw that we need to have standardized for landscape architects. In this website, you also have spreadsheet schemas, you have information about this, what this object is, and so on. A good thing is that Building Smart International some years ago started to see that IFC could expand not only for buildings. So they started this project that in the Building Smart data dictionary, real life object mapping. So in this data dictionary, you have already a lot of objects that is already standardized. So with this kind of code down here, if the software companies, the developers could use this string, then they immediately that this is actually playground equipment. We also at the same time saw that Landscape Institute in UK have done a lot at the same time for standardization. They have come up with product data templates for some objects for landscape architects, and we took this further on and put all the information that we have already done in the years before in standardization into this kind of systematic spreadsheet information. On this spreadsheet you have also linked to these spreadsheets on our website. In this spreadsheet, we also have put systematically said that in the design stages, when is it necessary for the information to be in the model. So this is different kind of design from early phase to as built. When does this information on the object will be necessary? In 2018, the colleagues of mine for this standardization went to Germany and held a presentation. It's a paper with a link here that shows more information about this. It's also a link here to UK because the National BIM Toolkit, for example trees, they have already defined what kind of level of detail and level of information on object. So if we go in here, we can already see also a standardization for what kind of geometry is necessary and what kind of information is necessary on landscape objects through different kind of development. When I put this together, IFC is an open standard and they have different kind of development through the different kind of IFC standards. Today we are talking about more and more like IFC 4, Vectorworks was the first one that was certified for that. But when we're working with a huge project, we need all engineers to export the same IFC type. Since not every design tools are good to export IFC 4, we actually are using IFC 2.3 in project today in Norway, because we lose a little bit information and we lose some geometry if someone are exporting IFC 4, but we hope it will be better as soon as possible. For landscape architect objects like a tree, common standard for IFC 2.3 is that saying that, okay, we don't have an IFC object 3, then it's called IFC building element proxy in IFC 2.3. As I shown earlier, that furniture had already predefined type. Building element proxies doesn't have this predefined type, especially not for vegetation. So to use your own user-defined type, you need to put this predefined type as user-defined. Then under object type, you can have a user-defined type. Since this is just example of a code you can put in front of a tree, so we know that this is a vegetation. The naming system is quite important to follow, because obviously you have rules for how you name and use letters. But every single object also have different kind of information on them. Normally on IFC you have P sets, property sets. But if you're using your own user-defined property sets, you can't use pset. You need to have a code that says who is owner of these property sets. The first two letters is Norway, and this next is Statsbygg and Sykehusbygg. This is an example of what kind of information that you could have on a tree. In the future, I hope that we can have an IFC object that is called IFC vegetation with the information. And then, if you use the right software for landscape architects, like Vectorworks, you already have a lot of information on vegetation in the vegetation database. You could actually map data from the database to user-defined property sets that you export out on IFC. You see that it's no problem in Vectorworks to have user-defined properties that you can export out on IFC. And here is an IFC file exported from Vectorworks, opened in a free IFC viewer, BIM-manual Zoom. But then you see that if you go on the user-defined property sets, and then you have the property and the value automatically mapped from Vectorworks. When you can communicate IFC also for landscape architects, and you have all these the information on the objects, then you can start to use this to really check the objects if they have the right information at the right time in the project. The work I'm doing now for Statsbygg is to actually take all the information that we have standardized for landscape architects, put it into a database, the right name for the objects, for the properties, and when is this information necessary on the object. And then this is coming out in the end of the year, on the beginning of 2021. They would like from this database export an open XML file and use a software to validate the IFC files. From next year, the landscape architects to actually evaluate their IFC files for the right information before we can actually send these IFC files to the client. If it's not have the right information based on this XML file from this database, then we have to go back to the design software to redesign it and fill in the right information. And then we can send the IFC file to the client. Now I'm going to quick through a project I'm working with Link Architecture today. This is a hospital, totally new in Drammen, half an hour from Oslo. Here I start with a movie. This movie was made every week when I was working with this. This is a link of our design models into a visualization program, Lumion. It helped a lot when Lumion came in the live sync with the design softwares directly in. In the beginning, we used a lot of time to figure out how we could get the design models weekly into Lumion and map the material. And if there is any designer that should use visualization modeling together with their BIM modeling, there should be landscape architects. We are working with so much material, living objects like vegetation, with light, with sun, with rain, with snow, with ice, with reflection of wet floor. When we have this possibility to link our design models that have all the information or the drawings together with these visualization tools, then it's a huge potential. And you can't do that if you're designing in 2D. You have to work object-based. So what I'm going to show further on, that all these objects, all the trees, everything is directly linked in from my BIM models. The only thing I've done here is that this is in my BIM model, this is an object. It's just like a square object. And in here, you can actually map, if you have the right material, it with vegetation. So if I redesign everything and link it back to here, this geometry change. So the only thing that we put into this visualization model was cars and people and bicycles and a helicopter on the roof. But all the geometry here comes directly from the BIM model. The low LOD for conceptual design for landscape architects. So actually in the beginning, we had 3 different kind of models. We had the senior landscape architect. He's really good, quick design in 2D drafting in AutoCAD. And then we had the terrain in Civil 3D. And we brought these together in a GIS model, Autodesk Infraworks. And then we had a whole area in this GIS model. Go through this video. In the beginning, this was much better to communicate than these Solibri models. Solibri is a model checker for IFC files where information is the most important. But in the beginning, when you're working, especially with landscaping, it's a visualization that is important to communicate landscaping. You need to have these kind of trees, vegetation, all these 3D objects that are impossible to show very often in 2D CAD and volume models for BIM for landscaping. You need this kind of softness and vegetation. So this was perfect to communicate with the client and the design team at that phase of the project. The same geometry, the same information can be brought in ArcGIS, the web scene. This is a part of the model that we had to deliver to the municipality to look at how this hospital will be seen from the city side. And here you see how important it is when you're working with GIS models that you need to see all the project with the surroundings. You need to see the hills behind, you need to see the end of the fjords, you need to see when does the sun exactly come up behind the hills. And you can go in every single courtyard, every room in this mall and see how the sun will react. When we went further on, it was more important that we went up with more detailed model. So then we build a Revit model of the whole site. And that we exported every week, and we still do. We export it as an IFC. We bring that into Solibri model checker together with all other models to see conflicts, communicate, and redesign. And at the same time, we could actually take these IFC files and bring it into the Norwegian software for calculation. Since we are using actually a software meant for architects and engineers, all the objects in these models So when we export this as an IFC file, bring it into calculation, all the landscape objects directly on architect objects. Since we are putting the right information, a code on the objects, then we got the producer of this software to look at this information and sort the objects, and then it got direct to the right landscape architect objects. Hope you're going to see a film here. Now we're going in the BIM object for landscape. Every single object have construction underneath ground, so we can see conflict with plumbing and electricity. All the objects have different kind of level of detailing. So since there is information and the outer geometry is important for objects, we can export that as IFC. Here we have a Norwegian coding system, so we can look at the information and put them right. And here we have different kind of filters that you can filter if the objects have the right information. So you do your own control of the object in your design model. And here you also have every single cost area have information on the object, so you can actually filter the objects based on different kind of cost breakdown structure. And here the same model exported as an IFC, open in Solibri model checker. You see the same geometry, same information in a model checker. What I didn't bring in here is all the other engineering models. But here you also see that cost and count is easy taken out in a model checker like this. And it's also based on cost areas, so you can filter it and you can see the different kind of breakdown structure for cost in the model at that time exported. Since this cost breakdown structure is changing all the time, it's quite easy to communicate that. And then this is taken into this cost calculation program, and since information is put on the right place, then you can actually put all the objects get directly on the right information in the cost software for cost calculation. What I always look about when I start working with a BIM is that how can I reuse information in as many software as possible. I don't want to use a lot of design in what I call dead design in Photoshop or 3D visualization program. I want to use as much as possible from the design software. I rather would like to go a little bit further, more detailing in my design software. We did a little bit more detailing in the BIM model so we can reuse that in the visualization. So the only thing we did in the visualization programs, we actually mapped the material with different kind of vegetation and other materials. When you have these detail models, then you can also bring it further on into VR, and this VR program directly link into Vectorworks and Revit and Archicad, so we can actually put on your VR headset and go through and do a one-to-one design review, both with the client but also with other senior landscape architects at the office. This is a movie showing how we put together both architects, landscape architects and interior architects model directly into Lumion, and suddenly we had all the three architects put together, and we had much more a visualization that also the architects and the interior architects could see the landscape as part of the rooms inside. On the left side, you see the BIM-manual for landscape architects. The important thing in a Solibri is to look at vegetation as barrier for inside-outside and how it will affect the room and the space and the sun. That's why it's important to have these volumes. And when you can map the volumes with this kind of vegetation so easy in a visualization software, it's really good. And here you see VR program that bring in the models, and here I can actually look at the model in up to 500. I used a lot of time doing these 3D models with paper and wood at the architect school, and when I went in here in VR, I was amazed how it looked. And here I took the model into twin motion. Here you see what I was talking about, the reflection of water. You can actually see the water, you can see snow, and you see the raindrops are falling. And when you see that in VR, and you can continue to do the end design with materials here in VR, it's a huge potential for landscape architects to start working with these models. Just start to work in 3D, start to work with BIM and IFC, and it gives you a lot of possibilities already now how we can use this without rules. When you're starting working with the BIM models, it's almost impossible to understand what is actually information just brought in today, and you can't rely on it because it's just information not checked, and what is actually built. So then you have to start working with different kind of codes. This is a Norwegian code for the quality of the information on the objects, especially when it's going to be green, because then it's already sent out to be built. So this roundabout here, we should be a little bit careful about changing the design. So this is the same model as shown earlier, but just in this view, I have the filters that overrides the information on the objects with different kind of colors based on the information on the objects. This week, we are changing the design for these areas, and it used to be yellow and now it's actually red, and this is a good information for everybody else that are working with our model, that see immediately if they put on this filter that this information is actually being changed, so they can't rely on it anymore. This is just a snapshot. I don't show you everything that is underneath the ground, but all our objects, especially trees for landscaping, we have a root ball on the trees. It's very important, and we saw that already in the beginning of 2000 when we are exporting IFC files, that if we didn't have a volume underneath the ground, all the electricity and plumbing were going directly through the trees. When we take this space and say that, okay, we need this space, nobody should go through this space or volume without conversation with the landscape architects. And this looks very okay, but you can have a visual control, but you can also have the software do the for you. But every week, senior landscape architects should go through this model, because this model is part of every meeting with all designers in the project and going through how to develop the project. And here you see that is a little bit mismatch. This very often happens that someone haven't changed the design. Here is both the tree and the light at the same position. And you see it immediately when you have a model. Vectorworks. These two websites says a lot. The ultimate software for landscape design, and if you need BIM, you need Landmark. One thing is going from 2D CAD drawing over to 3D. The next step is going from 3D over to BIM. You can have closed BIM, is based on objects with both geometry and information on them, but it's the software's own file format. That's why it's called closed BIM. It's still BIM, but if you go for open BIM like IFC, then it's based on a global standardization of how the information should be put on the object and the naming system, so everybody know exactly where to find the information and what the information should look like. That's the biggest quality of OpenBIM. Every designer needs to use their own software that is best treated for what they're going to do. So that's why IFC format is best thing, and especially for the clients, because the design software is changing every year. And we see in some design software that even if you have a file that is 3 or 4 years old, you are really struggling trying to open that file again. If you see a client that have a building that are going to be there for tens of years or maybe up to 50 or 60 years, they can't rely on a closed file format that is changed every 3rd or 8th year. They need to have a file that you can actually open in 50 or 60 years. But we have been seeing that this is on the left side. You see some of the software that we have been using for landscaping until now, and I've been showing you. Very often we started with 2D drafting in AutoCAD. We do 3D modeling with Civil 3D in project that we work roads and civil. But when we work with architects, we have been using Revit. And none of these tools are actually meant for landscape architects. So here in Norway we have the resellers doing plugins. So one reseller is good to have tools for Civil 3D, and the other one is a little bit better for the other software. When you compare landscape architects with architects, an architect that can work maybe 10, 20, 30 architects on one project for years. Then you have landscape architects that mostly have 3 or 4 different kind of project 1 week. Every project have different kind of software. It's amazing that landscape architects, small office, actually can afford to have all this software. What we have been looking for is it possible to reduce some of the software, and especially now when we're going more and more in 3D, everybody should work more and more with information. One thing is to put the information in the software, but we need also to take the information out of the software, because most of the software out there can be database and you can put a lot of information in there, but it doesn't help if you can't share it. Then you have to look at the software that can export your user-defined IFC information on IFC, so share it with everybody. And one thing is, what does this cost to have all this software? The biggest challenge is to have the landscape architects to actually know the software so good that they can switch between them and know exactly what you can do in which to be effectively. If we could reduce the time we spend on learning software to more or less one and fewer software, that will help a lot. If you are in the same situation as many of the landscape architect firms in Scandinavia, I think these 2 websites are a good start. On the left side, if you go into Vectorworks University, it's a very good start. I think it's about half an hour. And these 2 slides down there showing another landscape architect office, how they change the use of software when they adapt to BIM for landscape architecture. And this paper here, moving from AutoCAD to Vectorworks Landmark, a guide, is a really good guide and make it a little bit easier to understand what to do when you're going from CAD over to BIM and from your standardized Autodesk products and over to Vectorworks Landmark. Then I'm finished. Thank you.